So we have a community lecture here. This is really fun for me to just get to riff a little bit more and not be so focused on lecturing on specific content that's related to a class I'm teaching. So we're going to talk about, whoops, um, we're going to talk about fascial properties, myofascial pathways, sinew channels. And there's lots of different ways to think about this stuff. And so what I'm talking about isn't the only way, but it is, I think, a helpful way. And I love this quote, bodies need water, but water also needs a body. So you can just have that in your mind as we're going through the lecture. The image on the right is, you've probably seen these images on Instagram. I love them. And it's taken me a long time looking at them to actually really understand what they are, but they're actually like completely far out, like mystical images. They're from, I think, the 40s. And this guy, Harold Fisk, these are the meanders of the Mississippi River. So a meander is a channel that it used to have, and now it has a new one. And so these are basically drawings of the river's memory of itself. So we're seeing all the places that the river has been in its life. And I think one, that's just really beautiful. And two, I think that speaks to me, at least, it speaks a lot to what it's like to work with bodies and think about rivers as pathways of tissue and energy and information, and that those pathways are mobile and they maybe have memory, I think is just a really beautiful invocation. So I just stashed that there also just for fun. So we're going to talk about fascial properties and some of a few aspects of them that lend themselves to things that we're familiar with doing body work and or acupuncture. We're going to look at the idea of sinew channels and myofascial pathways as ways to start to explore like what is a meridian and what is this idea, what's happening with these ideas of different ways of conceptualizing anatomy in a body that isn't reducing it to just individual structures. I think when we start to unpack these three categories, we can see them actually as one category, um, and shed some light on how we can understand the idea of Jinglo. If you're reading Lon A. Lee's Body Maps with us, she talks about that nonstop. And some people are like, what the fuck is Jinglo? Which is a great question. And I went to 5 years of acupuncture school, and I could ask the question as easily as I could proffer an answer, actually. But etymologically, one of the ways that this character gets translated is the warp and the weft of a loon. We have a great picture here by Carrie Rosenstein, good friend, and the person who is my thought partner making all of these slides. And the warp is the vertical part of a loom. And so in the Jingluo idea of the meridians and their collaterals, the warp is the vertical main pathway, and then the weft is the horizontal pathway. So in this image, the orange and red are the warp, we could say the meridian, and then the blue are the collaterals, these side branches that are connected to an individual meridian, but not the actual meridian itself. Um, Thought it would be good just to kind of address that right away. And now we'll get into kind of unpacking this idea here of like, what is a meridian? What are these ideas? And I think one of the best ways to understand them is going through the body instead of through concepts. And when we're talking about classical Chinese here, I'm in the United States in 2025. We're a long ways away in time and distance from what was really said and meant by these characters. And there's a concept in philosophy called root metaphor, and a root metaphor are the metaphors that are foundational to a culture's thought and sense of the world. They're really like every culture has metaphors that are its way of understanding the world that it's in. And so, in a sense, the metaphors become that culture's projection, and everything fits into that metaphorical construct. And the George Lakoff and Mark Johnson wrote this book, Metaphors We Live By, and Sarah Allen quoted it in an amazing book called The Way of Water and Sprouts of Virtue about classical Chinese philosophy. And he says that so-called intellectual concepts, for example, the concepts in a scientific theory, are often, perhaps always, based on metaphors that have a physical and/or cultural basis. I inserted bias. The intuitive appeal of a scientific theory has to do with how well its metaphors fit one's experience. The most fundamental values in a culture will be coherent with the metaphoric structure of the most fundamental concepts in the culture. And I think for us, if you're born and raised in Western culture, there's a strong, I think to a large degree, subconscious way that these metaphors are in our thinking, they're in our language. And we really have to be attentive to deconstruct that in our mind because it shapes how we think. So then, if we're going to approach something like Chinese medicine ideas or Chinese philosophy ideas, I think it's what Sarah Allen introduces in this book is it's actually helpful to become aware of this. Otherwise, you're going to be messing everything up, which I think we've seen a lot. I did at least in school. So, Sarah Allen says that the natural world, rather than religious mythology, provided the root metaphors. Did I skip a slide? Hold on a second. Nope. That the natural world, rather than religious mythology, provided the root metaphors for the earliest Chinese philosophical concepts. Um, I love this quote. So, water, which provides life, gurgles up, unhidden from the earth, and moves of its own accord, become perfectly level and clears itself of sediment when still, takes the shape of any container, penetrates the tiniest opening, yields to pressure, but wears down the hardest stone, becomes hard as ice and disperses as steam, was the model for philosophical ideas about the nature of the cosmos. This natural world was the source of the root metaphors used in the formulation of abstract concepts and its imagery and is embedded in the language and structure of Chinese philosophy. Then, plants, which water nourishes, served as the root metaphor for understanding the nature of specific living things, including human nature. In Chinese, however, people were included among the myriad living things, the Wanwu, a category that encompassed both plants and animals. According to Allen, the plant world contained the whole of animate life and is the complement with water in the classical Chinese framework. So it's not just one, it's the two together. And I think, we're in a time now, thankfully, where there's a lot more conversation about that humans are just part of a weave of nature and not standing outside of, which that's part of um, the Western root metaphor is that humans are outside, exceptional and outside of nature. So according to Allen, um, or the contrast that with English language, which doesn't have a common word at all that includes plants and animals and humans, and we're left with this disembodied nature. And I think we do better definitely when we invoke the living world and just see humans as just one component of that. Um, by recognizing these metaphoric structures implicit in Chinese philosophical discourse, we can begin to structure our own thought in a way that more closely resembles that of the ancient Chinese. This effort offers insight into the relationship between language and thought and provides perspective on the cultural basis and limitations of our own preconceptions. I just think this is so beautiful. And I read this in my first year in graduate school, studying East Asian medicine. And it was it wasn't assigned, it was an optional book. And it was it was one of the best things I read in 5 years of graduate school because it gave me a way to challenge and interrogate my own thinking the whole time I was going through school. And I think that was as important as anything that my teachers were actually teaching me, because if I was not thinking in a way that was doing what I could to disassemble the projections I was putting into the content, I was doing better at taking the ideas on their own. Like I was always asking, I understand what's being translated, but how close is that to what they meant? And my teachers were not very good at engaging me on that question. But this book gave me like, there is no answer to that in 2025 sitting in my house in Portland, Oregon. There is no reconciling that. And yet, we can keep turning to nature and looking to study nature, to study what we can learn from nature, apply that to what we know about the body, revisit whatever models that we're studying to understand our work, and then get closer to them, whether they're studying classical Chinese or it doesn't matter. But I think the idea was pretty influential on me, actually, as I look back whenever I read this 2006, 19 years ago. Is that right? Yikes. The root metaphors of Western culture extend back to Greek and Roman times and are deeply imbued with religiosity. I think it's important to note that in the time of the philosophical strains that became part of classical Chinese medicine, that culture was not religious in any way. So it was that the natural world was given the symbolic significance. Um, and so Western culture underwent a seismic change with the industrial age. And since then, many of the dominant metaphors are that of the machine, surveying metaphors in medicine, the factory, and like mechanical mechanisms are everywhere. Symbiotic and relational processes are much more difficult to find. And the material world is often defined by just that, its materiality. If it can't be seen, weighed, measured, or somehow objectively quantified, it doesn't exist, nor does it have cultural significance. Obviously, as we're seeing by the world that's created, it's a challenging way to be in the world. Um, so the root metaphor for this lecture, assuming we can shake a little bit loose from Western mind, is the interplay between rivers, the warp, and the ways in which the rivers and their tributaries structure the entirety of the physical world through which they flow, the weft. It's definitely an interplay between fluid and matter that gives rise to the multiplicity of all forms. And I think looking at fascial properties is a great way to become like dislodged from the rigidity of the Western mind, especially a Western scientific medical mind, because fascia just like completely upends all the physiological modeling that they have. It upends it upends the categorization that Western medical science is so keen on. And so they still haven't even agreed on nomenclature because it's like literally slippery stuff. So I think just a great thing to study to give ourselves something tangible to practice, to think differently. Sorry, hold on. So I think it's always good in our internet age where things get real sloppy to land in some definitions. So this is from the Fascial Research Society. And they define the fascial system like this. The fascial system consists of the three-dimensional continuum of soft, collagen-containing loose and dense fibrous connective tissues that permeate the body. But permeate's a pretty key word there. It incorporates elements such as adipose tissue, adventiae, which I have to relook up. I can't remember what that is, and neurovascular sheaths, aponeuroses, dense fascial structures, deep and superficial fascia. Deep fascia is not like deep, like in the innermost core of our being. It's just the next layer of fascia after the superficial fascia. Um, I was confused about that for a long time. Epineurium, joint capsules, ligaments, membranes, meninges, myofascial expansions, periostea, the fascia around the bone, retinacula, septa, tendons, visceral fascia, and all the intramuscular and intermuscular connective tissues, including endo, peri, epimysium, the fascial system surrounds, interweaves between, and interpenetrates all organs, muscles, bones, and nerve fibers, endowing the body with functional structure and providing an environment that enables all body systems to operate in an integrated manner. That last sentence is very sneaky. It's very good. It's also super sneaky. Because that sounds like, oh yeah, cool. Who'd argue with that? But what they're saying is that the fascial system is its own communication system that exists and operates in the body independent of the nervous system, which the Western science has a real hard time with that idea. But more and 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 more, that seems to be true. Always how that it happens, they're not so clear on yet. But that it seems to happen does seem clear. Oops. So we're not going to get bogged down in all of this. I'm going to focus on a couple of aspects of fascia. But it's made up of, um, it has a fibrous component, which mainly is collagen. We're just going to focus on that. So collagen is a protein. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in upcoming slides. Integrins are super cool, and it's a form of collagen at the cellular level. So that quote was talking about lots of more gross, like pretty big fascial structures, but the extracellular matrix, which is like in between everything in the body, is also collagen and also part of the fascial system. And integrins are these little collagen like tubules that come off the extracellular matrix, and then they penetrate every single cell in the body, and they link the extracellular world with the world inside the cell. And I tried to promise Kim I wasn't going to get into too many tangents, but I can't not share this because it's so interesting. So there are people that are starting to hypothesize that it's the milieu, like of the extracellular matrix, or we can go embryologically, this is kind of easier to think about, that it's the milieu of the embryo, right, which is mostly kind of a fluid medium, maybe a thick fluid medium. It's the milieu that has the intelligence that signals the cells to what they're supposed to become. It's not this like knowledge that's inside of every individual cell that somehow knows exactly what it's supposed to be and that that's the control center. Like that sounds weird when you look at nature. It doesn't sound weird when you look at Western culture because look what we're living in right now, where there's like some central control that's in charge of everything. That's not how nature rolls. Nature rolls in a system-wide coherence. So it makes more sense that the milieu has the intelligence and it signals into the cell what the cell is supposed to do, not the other way around. That blew my mind when I read that. I was like, that makes so much more sense than like the random lock and key shit that we learned in school. Like little keys are like bouncing around and then they bump into a cell and they just like manages to like match up with some little receptor on the outside of the cell and then they can do some magical thing. Like seems not true at all. Um, so integrins are cool. Fluid is the ground substance or extracellular fluid, which I think is this milieu idea. And cellular, which are mainly fibroblasts and myofibroblasts, which are kind of what secrete and kind of create all the collagen and stuff. There's so many different names for all this stuff. I hate studying it because it's literally a mess. It's so hard to study. So I try to simplify what's pretty complicated. We're going to talk about collagen and ground substance in depth because I think those are what really create the properties that we're interested in as people who work with bodies. Um, all right, so collagen, it's a protein. There's more of it in the animal world than any other single protein. It's estimated that in humans, about 65% of our proteins are collagen. So if we just do a little thinking, if nature created all this collagen, it's probably important. So it's the fibrous content that makes up tendons, ligaments, bones, vessels, organs, etc. It's what gives all of these tissues their structure and tensile strength. It will lay down with more or less density and more or less viscosity depending on the tissue type it's becoming. And the collagen takes both microforms, as we just talked about with the extracellular matrix, and macroforms, as we would consider maybe in the myofascial system or the cranial fascial system, the visceral fascia. And at both levels and everything in between, there's collagen. It's the main protein we are. So like as collagen is, so are we. Ah, okay. Collagen forms itself into a triple helix called a fibril. Fibrils are laid down to form all these different structures that we've been talking about. The fibril is hollow and forms a tube. These are generally called microtubules. And like all other tubes in the body, it circulates fluids. There's billions of these microtubules inside of us circulating fluid. Thus, in their aggregate, like their totality, makes up a circulatory system of its own. And it's really interesting to consider what it's circulating, and science doesn't actually totally know, but it seems to be something that's like it's like lymph, but it's not lymph. Dean Jawan, who's a writer, who writes like science stuff for body workers. He quoted, I never could find the source of the quote, that the like ground substance was had at least components of cerebral spinal fluid in it. I don't know. And as I've been putting this lecture together, and like really kind of geeking out this summer on water, I really started realizing, jumping off of this other idea of the milieu, that one of the biases of Western culture is to focus on material stuff, and everything's defined by the material stuff. So even when you study fascia, everything's oriented around the collagen and the materiality of this. But fascia isn't what fascia means is these two things together. The stuff and the fluid is what gives things the properties. And maybe it's the fluid that is then actually responsible for the stuff and not the other way around. But anything you read from a Western perspective about fascia is going to be focusing on the stuff first and the fluids tangential to that. And yet, like, you can go a long time without stuff, but you can't go very long without water. So, like, it just shows there's like such a schism in Western thinking that just like sitting around in your house and just like watching anything happen outside in your yard, and you're like, wait, these people are fucked up. This is wrong. But then you go to graduate school and they're like, no, this is how it is. And you're like, pretty sure not. Doesn't make sense. Um, so anyways, that's such a new kind of thinking for me. Maybe not new for some of you, but it's new for me. I didn't even have time to make a slide about it. So, but that's my current kind of hypothesis. So the collagen fibril is a polar molecule, which means it has a charge. The charged molecule interacts with the fluid environment of the ground substance and structures it. This is a really cool idea. So a significant part of the ground substance is likely water, which is a polar molecule, H3O, and it can change its charge depending on its environment. So the collagen fibrils, their polarity makes all the water that they're around all align itself in exactly the same way. It creates what they call an ion channel. And then that channel is able to move energy. This one physicist postulates at the speed of light. So that this is and then this gets into some like really fun ideas, but this needs to be another lecture about like what is a meridian, and like some Chinese medicine people are like, well, it's just energy, as if it's not immersed in our physical substrate of our body, and like then they get really offended if you want to talk about the body part of it. But you're like, well, the whole reason we're talking about it is because it's in a body helping a body be healthy. So it's like it's also then of the body. It's not of the body. It's fundamentally of the body, and I think it's of this aspect of the body specifically. Um, Sorry, I got a little animated about that. But it gets frustrating sometimes trying to have those conversations with people. So this could be a way of thinking about channels, meridians in East Asian medicine, and East Asian medicine isn't the only culture even that has ideas about how energy moves in the body. It's just the one that I happen to be most familiar with. Um, and I think this slide here, I probably should have put the reference point. Basically, what I described right here, like thus in their aggregate, they compromise a major circulatory system. This is the triple burner meridian in Chinese medicine. So if you're familiar with Chinese medicine, there's 12 meridians. All 11 of them will make perfect sense to you. Maybe 10 will make perfect sense. The 11th would be the pericardium, and then somebody would tell you it's the membrane that surrounds the heart, and you'd be like, okay, that's weird. It's an organ, but okay, I can picture that that's actually a thing. And then they'd be like, okay, well, what's this triple burner thing? And then they'd be like, well, it circulates fluids. And you're like, well, isn't that the kidney and the bladder? And you're like, well, yeah, well, different fluids. And then that kind of the end of the conversation for a long time. But like they were so smart, they were so tuned in to their body as part of the larger natural body that they understood that there was this need and ability for fluids to move around to sustain and make life, that they gave it a equal position among all the other 12 as an organ. And guess what Western science finally is starting to realize is that there A is a fascial system, B, it's its own organ. And yet, the medical system is dismissive of Chinese medicine somehow. So I'm not sure where the irrationality lies, but somewhere in what we're talking about. Ground substance is basically everything that I've just been talking about. So it's the fluid that's found in all the body's connective tissues. Depending on the specific tissue, there's going to be more or less of this fluid. So in bone, ground substance is less predominant and it's thick and viscous. In an organ, there's a lot more ground substance and it's more fluid. You'll see the term sol, more fluid, and gel, thicker. That also really confused me when I was first studying this. I was like, sol, solid, gel, like squirt some gel out of a bottle. Like, can we just flip them? But that's not what it means. So sol, more fluid, gel, thicker, more gelatinous. So this refers in part to the ratio of the ground substance in the tissues. So think a helpful thing to think about when we're talking about fascial properties and why fascia is so hard for the Western scientific world is it's basically the same constituent parts that are your like tibia and the skin of your liver, just different ratios. So the Western science can't figure they can't categorize that easily. So they have a hard time with it. So then they're like, it's easier if it's just not important because we don't want to bother changing everything. Ground substance is unique among intercellular fluids. It's not diffused from blood. It's distinct from lymphatic fluid. It's secreted by the fibroblast into the extracellular environment in concert with the collagen. And the ground substance is the fluid background within which all the other fluid processes take place. Um, they're in an ongoing and ever-changing dance with one another, and they form what some researchers call a liquid crystal, which I think is a pretty cool way to think about our body. Um, and this refers to their capacity to change shape and character from more fluid to more solid. If you've seen the videos of the strolling under the skin, you're seeing those fibroblasts secreting the collagen fibers, and then as they move around, the fluid is just secreted out of them. It's very cool to watch that. So, last property, all of this adds up to this idea of piezoelectricity. So, collagen belongs to a class of crystalline arrays of molecules that are called piezoelectric. Piezo is a Greek root meaning to press or squeeze, and piezoelectric crystals generate spontaneous electricity when they are distorted by pressure. The entire connective tissue matrix is an electrical generator producing fields of current wherever pressure or movement is taking place, and this energy production has a great deal to do with the warmth and thixotropic responsiveness of fascia. So, an acupuncture needle or hands-on contact of a certain type will generate this piezoelectric property in the connective tissues, and that starts to explain how the different types of work that we're all doing and are interested in have the impact that they have, and also why things like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, other intentional movement practices, they're specifically designed to activate this part of our body and this part of our communication and energy and information system. And they will change actually the state when this system starts to really move and maybe is running with a little bit more volume, let's say, it starts to change our consciousness also. We start to think differently. Our thinking becomes more open field and less binary. So, um, it will impact the brain also. I kind of think I captured I've talked so much about all this stuff that I got everything that's in this slide has already been covered. You're not missing anything. I'm gonna skip it. But I can't skip this one because the picture is so pretty. Um, so we talked about this. This is that triple burner idea that there are a body-wide system of waterways distributing fluids throughout the entirety of the system. It's totally different from the ways in which the water element organs, kidney and bladder, are described. Um, the Sanjiao is a yang fire organ, which intimates that there's movement, energy, and in this system of thought, the energy is analogous to information. If you're familiar somewhat with Chinese medicine, um, then the three burners can also be like the upper, middle, and lower of the torso. That's not what we're talking about here. So Chinese medicine, if you study it, is beguiling because the same English term means lots of different things depending on what we're talking about. Yeah, we have this whole body-wide communication system that's really smart. This is a root metaphors interlude because I couldn't help it. So Robert McFarlane relates this amazing story in his book Is a River Alive that illustrates what we're discussing. He's on a trip up the Los Cedros River in the Ecuadorian rainforest with this mycologist, Juliana Furci. Um, and they were hanging out around the campfire at night, and the forest came alive with light. Like literally, all the plant matter around them started glowing yellow green. And he wrote that the Juliana said, that's because it's alive. That glow is mycelial. It's made by the miles of fungal hyphae that are growing through the wood right now as the wood dies. The mycelium will, in the right season, produce bioluminescent mushrooms. I had never heard of this before until I read this in this book. I'd seen bioluminescence in the ocean, which is amazing. Um, but the story continues. McFarlane writes, the whole stump is shimmering with water light as if a luminous river ran through it. In places, the light is latticed, in others, it's continuous. Okay, so I read that and I've seen all these different images of the fascia, and I was like, holy shit. It's like talking about this same idea in the plant world where there's this this lattice work is a great word for it that is able to move energy and information because that's all light is just energy and information. And it's not a one-to-one analogy of what we're talking about. And this one thing I want to introduce in this lecture is that it's really okay to explore analogies from um, different arenas of knowledge, and they don't have to match up one to one for them to help you understand whatever it is that you're trying to understand. Like the Western world is like, well, that's not relevant because, these three things are different. And I'm like, okay, but 97 are similar. So isn't it cool? No, it's not cool because three are different. I'm like, well, like if you're looking at identical twins, do you count all their fucking hair? Like, yes, four more hairs. They're not the same. That the Western mind operates that way. It's so annoying. But I think it's really insightful. I think we can generate insights for ourselves by taking things that we know that we've studied, which are going to be things we're interested in. So we're gonna really care about them and start seeing how our specific system is finding relationships between things. And they're probably going to be to some degree accurate and will help you. These are just mine, the things that my brain is curious about. Juliana punctuates the experience and gives context for our inquiry. What we have here this evening is nothing. If you hit the right night, the right place, you can see all the veins of the forest lit up. You can see that everything is connected. No one is without the other. Mm. So this really reminds me of those quotes from Sarah Allen's book about the plant world being the metaphor for all life. And obviously, um, if you're familiar with Susan Simard's work, who studied the mycorrhiza in the forest, um, we were really talking about this idea of the triple burner then or the fascial system in the mycorrhizal system. It's just I couldn't give the lecture and not give a little shout out to these ideas too, because I think they're really beautiful. Um, so I think we've really covered this too. I'm going to skip this slide, but East Asian medical thinking is process oriented and it's relationship based. This is kind of pulling a couple of ideas from the quotes at the beginning of the lecture. And this is really what we've been talking about already, so I don't know that I have a ton to add here. Um, Channel anatomy is a really complex topic, and I think we've actually given it some really good context and understanding by how we've been talking because at going through 5 years of graduate school and talking about channels, like, we nobody really talked about it in this, like, it was never talked about as something that I could touch, like that I could dig my hands into, that I could like swim in, or that I could like put between my toes. But that's what's real about channels, not these abstract things that, well, when you're special enough, you'll understand what a channel is. Like, no, that's wrong. They're like in the earth. They're like, it's okay. They're tangible. They're not tangible. Um, so um, so we addressed this a little bit. There's 12 main channels or meridians. One of the ideas originally of a meridian also was a river. So in classical Chinese culture, there were the 12 rivers, and then we had the 12 channels. There's a system of 12 with astrology, like lots of cultures had systems of 12. Um, so we have 12 channels, and then they have different collaterals and things that feed into them and go off of them. We're not going to talk about that at all. And actually, I think one of the easiest ways to approach channels is to think about the sinew channels. It's one of the tangents of a main channel, um, which we're going to get into in the next slide. But just for the folks who aren't Chinese medicine people here, um, the channels are named off of the meridian, off of a correlated internal organ. Um, the meridian or channel can reflect the state of the organ. It can also be reflective of issues within that pathway itself. The organ name, so triple burner, heart, liver, kidney, whatever, spleen, any of them, represents the physical organ and signifies a process that occurs throughout nature that's reflected in our physical and mental emotional body. And so the organ is just the most dense representation of a pretty large array of processes. Um, the organ, I just said that. One of the roles of the channels is to protect the organ from damage from external or internal pathogens. So it's a communication pathway. The channels are interactive with our internal and external environments. I was watching a Gil Headley video this morning because I'm going to study with him next week. And he's like, you have to watch 9 hours of my videos before you come study with me. I was like, fuck, man. And so I'm watching them on 1.5 when I'm doing the Stairmaster at the gym. And so I'm in the gym at LA Fitness with Gil Headley on the Stairmaster. Don't tell him. And he did this thing where he pulled up the superficial fascia and shone a light through it. And then he just started talking about like our porosity to light, our porosity to like the electromagnetic frequencies. Like he just started talking about our porosity. And again, this also was something presented in acupuncture school is like, well, these channels interact with the external environment. And they're like, well, cool. How? You'll find out. You'll just figure it out. It was like this. It was always, everything was always like some special information that you couldn't, was never made tangible, but it is tangible. All right. So these sinew channels are very cool. Um, they're related to each primary channel pathway. They are absolutely at the level of the myofascial system. They're more broad than the primary channel, and they link with other sinew channels. So we could do a map of all the different sinew channels, which are myofascial pathways, basically, and see them all mapping to one another so that the whole body is connected through these myofascial pathways also. Um, the sinew channels provide surface protection from external pathogens and what we would call our overall tensegrity, this like structural tension that keeps us together. The sinew channels absolutely were identified via dissection. So they were doing dissection. So what we have here in this image is the bladder channel in Chinese medicine. It also, if you're familiar with looking at Western myofascial pathways, this would be called the superficial backline or the posterior myofascial chain. Um, and if I were to draw this, I would draw it even broader than how this is drawn, but it's a pretty good drawing. And all these places where it's shaded dark are really interesting to me because these are what in the classics it's generally translated as this is where it ties and binds. And if you look on dissection, all of these areas, and there's more areas than what are shaded here, but these areas are where there are significant myofascial relationships across joints. So we need a new anatomy book that gives muscles not just their attachments. We're not using origin and insertion anymore. That's outdated. That their attachments include both their bony attachments and their myofascial attachments, because every muscle has multiple myofascial attachments that are just as strong as its bony attachments. We just Western anatomy just hasn't cared to see that. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just hasn't been important. So they focused on these here. So like right here, that's where the gastroc and soleus meet, and then we're becoming the calcaneal tendon. Right here is where the gastroc and the hamstrings come together and are kind of like in a square knot with one another. Right here is where the sacrotuberous ligament is, which is the hamstrings coming up and part of them attached to the sit bone, but part of them continue on into this ligamentous tissue, which then becomes all of the erector spinae of the back. Going to tie and bind here towards the suboccipitals and then all the way up to the inner canthus of the eye. We have these really cool side branches here. I could go on and on this anatomy. I could break it all down, but the point is that we have, a couple thousand, if not more, years ago, this map of the body, and then we have this map of the body on dissection. This is from Tom Meyer's work in Anatomy Trains, and we have a dissection. He was like very specific about how he did his dissection, and this is what he came up with. And you can see it almost looks like he just copied the sinew channel drawing. He just left out the side branches because he's like a like he's a very linear thinker. His book's called Anatomy Trains. Like, talk about linearity. Like, the dude is linear. And if we're talking about root metaphors, I'm sorry, I don't want to diss because his book's really is it's an amazing book. But can we just not do the train track metaphor for things in the body, please? Um, so I don't know what I have on this slide here. See, isn't that much better? The picture here, isn't that like much more what we want a body to feel like? Um, so Tom Myers and a bunch of other people, I really don't mean to throw shade. It's just an unfortunate metaphor. Um, they started doing dissections, asking different questions than most of the dissection work that had been done, which had been done in medical schools, and they were surgical based. And so they were dissecting based on what a surgeon would want to know, which is really different than what we would want to know. And so Tom Myers and Gil Hedley and other people were started to dissect with a different gaze to see relationships in the body. And so we really do owe them a lot for bringing this understanding forward. And Tom Myers, all of his myofascial pathways, if you would look at anatomy trains, you can really just look at the pictures. They line up with the sinew channels in Chinese medicine. It's pretty cool. Um, so again, it's not a one-to-one correspondence always, and I do think actually the Sinew channels give us more information because they include all these related pathways, and Tom Myers has a harder time with that. It's really easy to see both presentations as like really akin to rivers of tissue that move across joints that are like, how a river is pretty undisturbed by any obstructions that in it. It's just like, I'm gonna go over it, I'm gonna go under it, I'm gonna go around it, I'm gonna do all of it actually. And they flow and contour and then merge with other rivers. And that's just like, that's much more true to how bodies are in nature. Oh, wow, I did good. I went fast. So I think this idea of the river with the body, like, it's not new to me. It's not unique. Obviously, it's in all the old Chinese medical texts. And when I did my first dissection class, we were dissecting, we'd taken the superficial fascia and skin off of the front of the neck, and we're then, we had the clavicle exposed. And I had had a preconception, obviously based on a lot of books that I had looked at, that like there was a really big difference between like the tissues that would be on the chest wall and the tissues that would be inside the rib basket. I was like, that's just going to be like, this really different. Like there's a wall there. Like there's like, it's really like different. And then we dissected it and we had like a little pocket open in the rib and we'd taken the lung out. And I looked and I was like, why does it even have a different name? You just see the tissue and it just went to the clavicle and then it just went like right around it and just kept going. And I was like, what's the same stuff? It's not different. It's not different at all. It was like totally the same. And I was just like, oh my God, like all these books that were made to study are just like on some level are total, utter lies, like total lies. And so looking at this image is just so much closer. Even this is also a construction. It's just a construction that still orients around relationship as opposed to around creating discrete entities where there aren't discrete entities. Does that make sense? So if we're thinking about our work, both of these images leave out like the layers upon layers upon layers of tissue that there are, and there's always going to be more relationships in a specific body than any rendering of a map could offer. But these are better. I'm not criticizing these. I'm just saying we don't want to be too attached to these either. That these are great and there's more. So I can't believe I did so good. Was I talking like a mile a minute? I was talking on 1.5. I put myself on 1.5 so I could get through all the slides I made for the lecture. So anybody watching at home, you don't need to put this on 1.5 because I did it at 1.5 with my real voice. This quote just blew my mind when I read it. It's from Is a River Alive? So he's talking about this person. So in the book, he goes to three different rivers and then he kind of like pals himself up with people that are working to save or really deeply participatory with a river system. And so he's in India with these rivers. It's so sad, but also really beautiful. But these rivers are like literally dying. And this guy, Yuvan, if I think he's like E_naturalist on Instagram. I've actually been following from him for years on Instagram. And I was like, oh, homie, what's up? You're in this book. Um, so he's been doing really beautiful work, and Robert McFarlane relates this story from Yuvan's book called Intertidal. For over a decade, Yuvan, has dedicated himself to pursuing to its logical ends the realization of his body's porosity to water. Yuvan says, my kidneys are marshes, my blood flows through reed beds and rushes, connecting body to cloud to lake and ocean. I am primarily hydrosphere, inner and outer merge, and one simultaneously walks on all shores. Mm, my heart. So I thought that was a really lovely way to end, kind of to bring together the two quotes on the water and the plant world from Sarah Allen's book, The Way of Water and Sprouts of Virtue. And I think just the whole point of the lecture was to invite us into a different way of thinking about the body. And hopefully I've done that. So I can't believe we have time for like more time than I thought for questions and stuff, or conversation or discussion or whatever. I don't know if there are questions or not. I couldn't see anything.
You were so on time, Michael.
I can't believe
Um,
first time ever.
one of the questions that people did have was curiosity around whether or not you would be sending out copies of the slide deck afterward or just the video recording.
Just the video recording.
Okay. And then there was another question wondering if you recall where you found the Sinew channel pictures
Oh,
online.
those are Deadman. Yeah, there's a
Okay. Yeah.
mine's at work. Yeah, that's the main
Yeah.
acupuncture text is one of them is Deadman. So those you can
Yeah.
look there. Most of them you can just find online if you do Sinew channel search.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I suggested Deadman as a source. So,
and then oh my God, I can never remember her name. But somebody on here knows her name that teaches the Sinew channel stuff too.
oh, the Anne
And
Cecil
C.
And
Thurman.
Cecil
Sturman.
Thurman. Yeah, you can
She's
buy
amazing.
yeah, you can buy a PDF of just her Sinew channel drawings for like not very much money. It's like 25 bucks or something like that. Um, and just get the Sinew channel drawings, which are I her drawings are better, actually. I just didn't want to rip hers off. Um, any other things that people want to talk about? Questions, comments?
I have a question.
Oh, yes, please.
I even put my hand up. It's me again. Um, I that was awesome. Thank you. I really love how you're incorporating the art with the quotes and your ideas. And I'm curious if you can speak to um how so obviously this has changed the way that you practice body work and Chinese medicine. But I wonder if you can speak to how. Like, can you kind of dig into what's different for you as a practitioner when you're thinking about um, the continuity of muscular fascial systems in a body?
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for like the hardest question first.
And that's always what I lead with.
Um, no, it's probably the most on point question. One of the main ways that this like, this is like this thinking is, it's like it's where I am now, 25 years in. So there's a lot of thinking that came before this thinking. And a lot of that thinking has really been about building trust in me to just trust um, in a lot of ways, simplifying my approach and simplifying my work. And so really trusting that the simplicity of what I'm feeling in the tissues and following the idea of these maps and the fascial properties and the fascial like studying the fascial properties really helped me understand the ideas about meridians. That's helped me trust that whether I'm doing myofascial work or visceral work, I can track pulse through that and know that I'm doing similar work that I would be doing if I were using needles and doing, quote unquote Chinese medicine. But I honestly, like, not trying to be like evasive at all. The biggest way that it's changed my work or impacted my work is just that I trust. Like I really just trust the more elemental aspects. Like if I'm feeling something, then it's significant. I may or may not know how or why, but I trust following that thing. So it's really helped me build my trust.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? A really quick
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Um, so part of what I'm hearing you say is that it changes how you're thinking about other bodies, and it's also changed how you're thinking about your body as a body in service to other bodies. Is that
Yeah,
true?
yeah,
Or
yeah.
did I make that
No, no,
up?
no, absolutely. Because that's my interface, right?
Right, right.
In addition to like all the other, the interrelational aspects of things also, but yeah, my physical body is my interface, right? Through my hands mostly. Um, yeah, that's a great, I don't think about that maybe as much as I should, but I like I do, we know each other, so like I'm so kinesthetic that then for me, it is really just trusting what I feel. And then I really like all of this, which probably you're like, ah, that dude's like it's complicated up in his head. Um, it helps me approach my work in a very simple way. Like
Really?
I try to stay very simple when I'm working and this helps me trust staying elemental.
That's really cool. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Anything else?
Michael, there were two questions from another person. The first was whether or not you've explored the uncharted body from Dr. Daniel Kuhn. I don't know if I'm
I
saying,
haven't seen that yet. I'll have to check.
yes. Um, Derek, I don't know if you want to pop in and add any thoughts about that or
Yeah, I can do that. I make myself a little more presentable before I go on video. Um, Dr. Daniel
Fine, that's
Keown,
all good.
Dr. Daniel Keown, he studied and practiced as a Western surgeon, and then was fascinated by the work of, or by Chinese medicine. What is it? The advanced channel theory and practice
Hmm.
from Dr. Kim or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and so he studied a lot of that, and then he's the writer for The Spark and the Machine.
Uh-huh. Cool.
And so that's like his kind of layperson book. And then his like textbook that he then has is called The Uncharted Body.
Mm,
And so he's got some good videos out there. What
that's
spurred my
cool.
thought was when you were talking about the bladder channel. He's got
Hmm.
a really cool, his YouTube channel, I think, is called What God Forgot to Tell Surgeons. And he's talking, and one of his videos is on the bladder channel, and he shows how in the developing embryo, all of the little organs, like the pre-organs, have a bladder system that essentially drains down
Oh,
into the bladder
cool.
channel,
Yeah.
and then it eventually drains down into the development of the bladder.
Yeah.
And he talks about the acupuncture channels as being the spaces between the fascial planes.
Hmm. That's right.
And so yeah, his work's pretty neat. His main model is like the development of the human being, essentially, or like every being is like
Mhm.
looking at the jellyfish, where we have like the skin and the excretionist piece, and then the mouth on the inside, and then like on the interior, and then the jelly
Right.
in the middle where all the life happens.
Yeah. Yep.
um yeah, so his stuff's pretty cool. um and then, so I've been practicing John Barnes myofascial release for 11 years now. And then through that became aware of like, oh, I have seen these three channels somewhere, and turned out the acupuncture channels when I made that connection, then went and got my master's degree for acupuncture and oriental medicine. And that was like right before COVID hit. I still have not gotten the resolve to like take my acupuncture boards. And you made an interesting comment about your practice, knowing more of the myofascial and trusting that simplicity. And like, I think you said something along the lines of like, you can feel the changes of the pulse as if you were using needles.
Mhm.
And so then my follow-up question became like, how has that influenced your practice in the use of, or like in the idea of unwinding the lack thereof needles, and where you find that
Yeah,
relationship?
I think that's a really good question, and I think my practice is maybe a little bit just unique, so that I use less needles.
Yeah,
Certainly, part of that is just a business thing because I stopped taking insurance, so then there's less people coming that are using their acupuncture benefit because that's what most people have. So part
sure.
of it is there's a fundamental pragmatism there. And part of it is even with people where I know that they like my acupuncture and I could do acupuncture with them, I become much more like I really have to ask myself like how am I going to get the most done in service of this person with the time that I have with them? And I often find that it's moving through the hands-on work that partly I think because of um, the time that we're in and how stressed out people are. I find that less and less people's systems are like really interested in needles. Like being punctured is a thing.
Right,
And it's not a bad thing, but it is a thing
right,
that's a different type of thing than receiving touch for 45 to 50 minutes or whatever. And I think people's systems are just really they're already kind of like zzz, and acupuncture can have that zzz effect. And so
Sure.
the hands-on work, I think, has just become something that that I just think, at least the people that are coming to see me, that that's what's working better for us together. Um,
Yeah, and that's what I found in practice. So I really appreciated, like, I had this background in myofascial before I even started the acupuncture, my master's degree. And so by the time I was in practice, I was usually running two rooms and like do the intake, put in the needles, then take another person, get that, or like, I don't know. That was like dipping between the two rooms. And then so while one person was cooking with the needles, like go in and do some myofascial, hands-on visceral work, something like that. And like the vision that I've had is it's a lot of like what I feel would be ideal and like where I'm like kind of remiss that I haven't got my license yet is being able to use the needles in kind of the four corners of the body, more like a Korean
mhm,
acupuncture style
mhm,
of like pinning down the corners of the tapestry
mhm,
and then using my hands to help create the space for
mhm,
the body to regulate
mhm,
the flow of
mhm,
the parts, pieces, and energy flow within the whole.
mhm. Yeah,
Um,
I do that a lot. Extraordinary vessels and then body.
yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I was doing in clinic. A lot of extraordinary channels and then like some of the key points and then like, all right, now we're gonna go in and actually do the
I
thing.
think I think one thing that's interesting, and then let's have some time for some other folks to have questions. But
Yeah,
one thing that's interesting is to think about too, that I think about this no matter what I'm doing, is like whatever it is that we're doing, I really try to be aware of dose. And definitely, I've gotten better and better in my career, but I'm also really like I can get pretty enthusiastic, and so then I can like overdose somebody with the work, even if the work
sure.
I'm doing is subtle. And so I really try, one of the ways that I've helped myself think about that is what I imagine to be beneficial about what we're doing isn't what I'm doing, but it's the system's response to what I'm doing. And
Totally.
I ask myself, like, well, how many responses does this system have in it within the time that I have with them? And I don't want to make them respond to more than what their system is going to be benefited by or that it has the capacity to respond to.
Yeah, totally.
And so then that also really helps me simplify my work and just really trust that there's a process that's unfolding and I can just like really like slow everything down. And like if you were watch me work often, not always, but often, you're like, wow, I gotta really do that much. Like there's
Yeah.
not like a lot, like I'm not trying to address tons of different things or I'd like really kind of try to create a pretty distinct focus because I find a lot of times that's what a system is gonna like, that's gonna be a nice, concise story for that system for that time that we have together. And to add more maybe means everything has less impact.
Yeah.
Took me a long
I
time. It's taken me a long time to, again, it's not learn that. Like anybody could have had told me that, but it's to trust that. And that's
Yep, and
more, more active.
that's kind of where I'm at in practice right now is learning to trust that and like not just trying to do one more thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love the idea of pulses. So like with the John Barnes work, it's at least 5 minutes, but always longer for a thorough release. And it's just like honing in with your hands, like you've got radio dials to find the therapeutic pulse and just let it resonate in there and do whatever the body needs to do, following barrier upon barrier
Mhm.
as it does its thing.
Yeah. Let's let some other
Cool.
folks jump in. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm
Thank
excited to check
you.
out that book. Anybody
Yeah,
else
thank
have
you. I'm
anything?
excited to watch the recording.
Yeah. Anybody else? Good question, Allie. Man, I don't know. Kim, resources to learn about Pulse? Angelica?
Pulse, like, are we talking therapeutic pulse or are we talking like pulse
These
in
Chinese
the
medicine Pulse? Is that what
Chinese
you mean,
medicine
Allie?
pulse?
Just as somebody who isn't trained in Chinese medicine,
Got it.
more of like a bodywork background, like if I just wanted to just
Hmm.
listen, what am I listening for?
Hmm.
That is a great question.
Let's do that, Allie. Let's do that in class. I'll
Yeah, it
look
might,
it up in
yeah,
class, and I'll do that with you.
cool. Thank you.
And you can partner with Kim. Kim's going to be in class.
Yeah, I'll be in class. Hi.
Hi. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, that's my son. He's right here.
Yeah. Hi. What else? Anybody else have questions, comments,
It's not so much
inspiration?
a question, but a comment. Um, just when you were, it struck me really hard, thinking about how our anatomy has been, like the dissection has been for the surgeon, and like how much that impacts us. Like that really impacted me thinking about my body like being the vessel that is listening to another body and like is the interfacing is the tool, the presence being the milieu that we're kind of like in together. And I had this thought today while I was working on someone that like I'm not working for my mind to understand, just like I think I'm not working like the anatomy isn't just for the surgeon. Like what my hands
Mhm.
are doing in that like responsiveness, it isn't for my like critical mind to always understand what we're doing. Like I have to trust my hands that they're going to be moving with an intelligence that's with us within the body that I'm listening to, within my body that's responding. And I think there's something about the speed of that information, if we think about it moving at the speed of light, in my sensing systems, right? Like both of these piezoelectric systems talking together, like
Mhm.
I think that was my way of kind of, I think, translating the trust that I felt like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's it. Like for me, I can't. I think everybody, for all the time that I've spent teaching and the like hundreds of people that I've been able to teach and work with their hands, like everybody's system perceives differently, right? So we're just going to assume that. And then however it is that our system perceives, we have to have a relationship with that perception, because if we don't have that relationship, then there's nothing, we don't have anything to trust. That's like a big ask, right? Then we're just like in the void, like, so I think focusing on that, like what is it that you're feeling in your body that correlates to what you've learned is a positive response in another person's body, then that's what you can start to trust, and like you've been in class with me a lot, like that when I'm like responding to things, it might be a small thing that I'm responding to, but my response is like 100%. You know what I mean? It's not 83%. It's 100%. And I've just, because I trust that that response is significant. And so then I'm like, okay, that's them. And I'm like, okay, we're there. That's meaningful. And that just but it takes time. But also I really like, I don't, I absolutely try to not forget that when I first started learning this, I couldn't feel a fucking thing, which is part of why, like, I still study like a demon, because like it's part of how I can keep myself honest, one. And then two, it's constantly informing and building in my system that capacity to perceive, because I'm not, it's not bullshit. I really do imagine all this stuff when I'm working, and it helps my perception. I don't think like my natural system was like came into this like is super easily perceiving all this stuff. I think I'm really well guarded. So like it has come with some effort, to do it. But the effort has been like feeding my imagination with stuff that's going to be helpful. That's why I like in classes I emphasize the imagination so much. Is that
Yeah.
Did I respond to your question?
I mean, it wasn't really a question. I was just like sharing an experience that I
Okay.
had. But I
Yeah.
think like in listening to you, like there's something about my mind wanting to have like a linear experience with someone on the table
Mm.
and a linear experience in what it is that I'm feeling. Like I want there to be a train and I want to
Mhm.
understand the train. And like sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. And so I think what I'm experiencing listening to you and like reading this book like is like can I let those perceptions melt away? Can I be with the elemental like sensations that are here And that in and of itself is relational and impacting
Hmm.
something
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
therapeutic, even
Yeah.
if I don't understand it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we are going to understand it a lot of the time, honestly, or, if we are understanding it, we're understanding it through a model that we should understand has limitations because it's a model. And so reality is going to be always different than the model that we're using to interpret it. So then the simpler the model, the less like, clutter there's going to be. And then the more that centers the like integrity of the person we're working with and not our own ideas about things. And that's why I think returning to nature is so cool. And like the like studying the classical Chinese thought, which was like pre-religious thought, then we're like uncluttered with all of that nonsense, and it's just like, oh, there's just nature and we're bodies and we're of nature. And so like, how does nature do things? And then like that's what we get to do with our work. And that's hard to interface in the American healthcare system that way, but whatever. Interface as little as possible and then people need this approach.
Michael, I have a thought, and this question slash statement might come out a little bit messy. But I'm thinking about the variation in tissue presentation that occurs in musculature and fascia, and the way that we see, hypertonicity, the way we might see flaccidity, kind of this full range. And then also thinking about meridians and the various representations of the Jingluo. And it makes me think of the question that Lan Li asked in that godforsaken podcast interview.
Mhm.
And, she posed this question about like, does everyone have all of the meridians? And ever since that question came forward, I've been really thinking about like, okay, so meridians and the way that they show up, I mean, do we think it's possible that just as these tissues that we can really like feel may show up with all these different presentations. Like, do we think it's possible that some people just have like floppy meridians or like really
Yeah,
big
yeah.
meridians or like asymmetrical meridians? Like, this question now has been itching at my brain. And I don't expect you to have a clear answer for this, but I'm just like thinking about these parallels between these different ways that we conceptualize the body and with what we can see, knowing that
Right.
it's very different. And so, curious about the differences that may appear in the invisible anatomy that we can't like prove with our eyes, you know?
Mhm. Well, I think like I love that, and I think what it makes me think of from the book, which is a part that I've been really like has been itching at my brain, was when she was talking about, which we talked about in the lecture, that like meridians are like they are corporeal.
Yeah,
They're of the body. And I was like,
right.
oh my God, nobody ever said that in graduate school.
No, never.
So I was like, so if they're of the body, then I think they're all those things that you just said.
Right.
Right. And then I think that that's part of the code of Chinese medicine language that also can be pretty abstract of like deficiency or excess or foot
Hmm.
stagnation. You know what I mean? And like then it's
Right.
like that becomes the quality of the whole channel. And the other thing that I really love that also was a new to me was like I talk about this with clients all the time that like bodies are asymmetrical and tension patterns are asymmetrical. And so like let's not expect symmetry in your form. Let's just be with like this beautiful kind of everything is more beautiful when it's asymmetrical. Our whole system is more interested in something that's asymmetrical than that's symmetrical. And so let's embrace the asymmetry. And then she brought up like the meridians aren't symmetrical either. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah. Right.
But I thought that was like, that was like, I have this idea about the body, and then I was taught Chinese medicine in such a way that like I have been holding in my own system things that are incongruous, and I work really hard to have like to have coherence in like what I say and how I work and how I take it seriously presenting things to people. And so I pay a lot of attention, like, are my ideas coherent with my experience? And, she caught me with like, I was like, oh, I've been holding on to this incoherence here.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add a couple
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah.
One, I really like the image, like the idea that you said about the clavicle, where that like fascia or aponeurosis, wherever goes right underneath and just
Mhm.
continues into the neck from the chest. And so kind of with that image in mind, I have a patient who has some hardware in their ankle, and like I was kind of picturing this like gallbladder channel coming down and trying to find GD39, and I was like, oh, this is just all metal. And then kept kind of just like using our sensory hands and feeling around, and like it felt like it had just navigated a little bit more posteriorly and was able
Mhm.
to kind of like work with that channel in a now different light and different location.
Cool.
And so yeah, I totally agree with your statement slash question, Kim. So very cool. And then Christine Pearson, who's my teacher at NUNM, had a
Mm-hmm.
patient with that had like multiple skin grafts after, I can't remember if it was like a burn or just like cosmetic, but anyway, had a bunch of surgeries, and so she basically had to rediscover where a bunch of points had moved
Mm.
post surgery.
Yeah, cool. Yep, that's
Um,
right.
and so I'm sure there was also asymmetry there, but also just interesting to see that like
Mhm.
yes, the channels are like drawn on these pictures, but they're not necessarily like Western anatomy says where they're in a fixed location on every single person.
Right. I think
They're
if
proportionate.
yeah, for the folks that the body maps, one of the cool ideas she brings up about meridians in there, which I think is then becomes metaphorical for our like looking at any anatomy that we have to look at as people who work with bodies from a holistic perspective, was like that this idea of improvisation. I took a slide out that had Donna Haraway's idea of speculative fabulation in it. Um, that is like that the drawings of the channels were like kind of intentionally not accurate because it was assumed that the person that was perceiving it knew something about what they were perceiving and was going to apply it to a living body, and that they knew what the fuck they were doing, so that the we weren't dependent on this like objective like fundamentalism of the drawing, but that it was just could be a schematic. And like that's I love like I would draw schematic anatomy drawings forever and just geek out so hardcore, because then we're getting to fill that in with what we understand. It's schematics like in a way much more elegant, actually, from this idea of then we can speculate on that with what we know and add to that speculation information from our touch. So I think that like that idea is to me is like she introduces that pretty early and is a very radical idea. And I hope it makes its way into like all anatomy that is taught in massage school needs like a 110% overhaul, and needs to be in these kinds of ideas for massage students, because there's um it's just such a shame how much misinformation is presented to somebody who's going to be learning something to help people, that they're going to need a different perspective and a different map to do the work that people are coming to them to receive and do it well. We're just misserving them like right out of the gate with like the most fundamental information that they're supposed to be getting. So I think that like that when she brought that up, I was just like, thank you so much for creating some language that I've needed for years teaching this stuff. It's just really, I think she just nailed something very important with that idea. Chanel, are you still there? I love your comment. I'd love to talk about that. Is Cece out there? Cece gone. Anyways, did people see that? Cece had this comment. then the qualities that we were talking about from Kim's comment, that them being in the meridian versus of the meridian, I think is so cool. Like that it's not like this quality of something, but it's just that's in it and that it can change.
Chanel is still here.
Oh, do you want to say anything, Cece, about that? Yeah, what's up?
Hey, I don't know. I'm in the car, so I don't know
That's
what
all
I even
good.
look like right now. I can't see my video, but
Good.
yeah, hey, hey.
Hey.
I think yeah, I just think that that question of I think that I was definitely overlaying an image of sort of like maybe what the meridian or what I'm feeling could or should be, and then you notice when things are different, and then often that's like, oh, that's like pathology, right? And that's information, then we like do something. So sort of just thinking about it as like as as it being qualities of something, and there's not something inherently like wrong with that. Like we don't look at like the bark of a tree and it's like tangled. We're not like, oh, that's like we need to like rub on that and like peel it back and make it smooth, we're not approaching it with that way. So I think that the question and it posed, and then also being like, leaving space for the Jinglo to be different person to person and not comparative to like
Yeah,
some ideal measurement, which is also just feels like decolonizing,
yeah,
period. And so yeah, so I guess like just like that was just like a very simple, straightforward invitation into that space to
yeah.
apply it here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I love each person's like way that their system takes this in and metabolizes it because there's like so many of these specific examples that we need to talk about together to like decolonize our perspectives of all this work. So even all of us in these fields, which, if we didn't, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to say what I was just going to say that these fields all need decolonizing too, and all of our approaches need consistent interrogation around assumptions that we're operating from. And then, for me, I can only speak for me is that the more that I do that, the better the more oriented I feel in my work. And the more comfortable I feel meeting all the different, strange things that show up in a day or a week. And I feel really grounded in some things that I can trust. To get back to the trust thing, and that I can do my best to meet that moment for that person. But it is being able to have these conversations that helps that. What else? Anything? Good stuff in the comments too. I'm trying to, yeah, I don't know if people saw Angelica's comment. If you went to acupuncture school, you know how frustrating that is. Yeah. Anything else? Ryan, thanks for all the cool references in the chat. If people didn't track, Ryan was putting some good stuff in the chat. There's a link to the Strolling Under the Skin people put out a article that's got a video in it. So that's Jean-Paul Giamberto. I think that's his first name. I can't remember. Giamberto is definitely his last name. He was a hand surgeon that did this like amazing video that blew the internet apart, at least the part of the internet that is bodywork geeks. And so he's got like real live in vivo footage of the connective tissue doing its magic. It's really amazing. And the it's worth watching just for the narration is like unbelievable. Like the narration is like I could just listen to the narration. It's hilarious. And then he has a book, which I can't remember the title, but I have it, and the book comes with a DVD also. So, Misty, you were asking about visual reference points. Of course, Gil's videos are also great visual reference points. I have to say, in the last probably 5 years, watching his videos had done more for my understanding of things than anything else. So that's always a great reference of a place to go. And I think that I have a really hard time with a lot of the text that's in anatomy trains, but you could get the posters. You can get the posters, and the pictures are really beautiful. They're really helpful. And then it's a fun project to just lay the anatomy into those pathways. Um, and I'm just trying to think of other resources for people. Kim, what are good for people who aren't Chinese medicine, people that are interested in anything? I'm terrible at that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when it comes to just basic theories,
Hmm.
um, I mean, from more of a five element kind of point of view, I often suggest Wood Becomes Water, which is by Gail Reichstein.
Oh,
And it's a
cool.
really beautiful introduction to some basic concepts of Chinese
Hmm.
medicine, but more five element based, which is different than what we've been talking about
Yeah,
today,
yeah,
but
yeah.
still discusses, the way that it shows up physiologically in the
Mhm.
body, but relates it to larger cycles in nature and the way that the body represents these larger cycles. And I think that's a really beautiful book that I often suggest to patients that are just interested in learning about some foundational principles that relate to Chinese medicine.
I liked Between Heaven and Earth. I don't
Yes,
know
also that.
about that
Yes.
one. I like that one.
Yep, that one's great. Between Heaven and Earth is great. And then of course, like The Web That Has No Weaver
Mhm.
is great too.
Yeah, those are three, I think, pretty good ones.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, cool. Listen to the audio. Oh, that was Penny. That was I'm pretty sure you can find the whole video online. It is called Strolling Under the Skin. It's like about an hour. If you're looking at YouTube things and it's about an hour, that's the whole video. And the narration is just brilliant. It's like, I don't know, they translated the French and it's hilarious. I really like it. There's a great video, really, really interesting. Um, awesome, everybody. Thank you. We will get the recording out if you join late or want to check it out again. And really fun to be with everybody. So thanks for sharing some of your Wednesday night with us.